Hello and thank you for joining us here at Cottonwood Island Park as we bring to you our 2020 year in review. We all know how troubling the last 365 days have been, and now we're faced with the challenge of trying to fit everything that transpired into a 1-hour program. We'll start back in January. Just days after the extension of a court-ordered injunction against blocking the Coastal GasLink pipeline project, a group of Aboriginal activists braved the frigid weather to rally on the courthouse steps in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. The protest marked 1 year since an injunction was issued against those blockading access near Houston to crews building the natural gas pipeline. Protests would escalate to nationwide rail blockades. Eventually, talks with government led to a memorandum of understanding over land rights and title between the Canadian government, the BC government, and the 9 sitting House chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en. By the end of the first month of the year, there was a changing of the guard at UNBC as Dr. Jeff Payne became the new acting president at the university following Dr. Daniel Weeks' announcement that he was going on medical leave. Now, some said the timing of the departure was suspect.
Since 2004, Dr. Jeff Payne has been an integral part of UNBC. From being the first faculty hired under the Northern Medical Program to becoming Vice President Research, Payne has become a leader at the school.
It means a lot. I mean, I've been at UNBC for 16 years and been in a number of roles. I've been a faculty member, I've been a researcher, and you know, currently I'm in the Vice President Research portfolio. And so, you know, first and foremost, I'm really excited to continue to help where I can to make sure that working with everybody at UNBC remains successful.
Payne's appointment of acting president comes following an email Wednesday sent from former President Dr. Daniel Weeks, outlining his need for medical leave effective immediately. This announcement not long after much controversy at UNBC, including the well-documented strike action and, more recently, the motion of a non-confidence vote.
UNBC is a community, and there's a lot of people that make up that community. And you know, although that there was some difficult situations over the last number of months, I think, you know, the goal and my goal as the acting president is to work with everybody, build those relationships, and make sure that we continue to move the university forward.
While some are taking the news in stride, others not so much.
I can say without equivocation, right now, anything issued by the senior administration at UNBC is viewed with absolute skepticism by all the faculty. So the question of the general confidence of the faculty in the senior administration is very much an open question.
Swanger notes for the better part of UNBC's history, it's been tough sledding. He raises the question of, is there strong enough leadership at the school to right the ship and improve worker relations? But it goes beyond the confines of the university walls.
Most importantly, to present to the outside community a stable environment that students will want to come to, instead of feeling that if I come to UNBC, my 4-year degree is going to be invariably interrupted with labor trouble. This helps no one. We're supposed to be here for the students, yet we're now investing all this energy in trying to figure out if the administration has got its house in order and how we're going to move forward.
Guesswork is what many are calling the foreseeable future, as there remains to be more questions than answers for many key issues at UNBC.
As we headed into February, it marked the end of an era at Northern Hardware as the long-standing downtown store opened its doors for the final time after 100 years of business.
It's not just a store.
No, the Northern was much more than that. For a century, it was a mainstay in downtown Prince George and such a key piece of the city's identity.
I think today kind of showed it's a social place. People would come to get advice and to meet friends, and for us it was it's where our parents worked, where our grandparents worked. It was our jobs.
It was. Yeah.
Family, right? Even the staff is family to us.
Lots of memories coming as kids, you know, when we were young, coming in, moving all the nail bins around and playing in the basement and building bikes. You know, it's where we started, and it's hard to believe that the end is here.
The once filled shelves now stand empty as folks head over one last time. Altogether, they say it's a major loss to the community.
It'll be missed, and they've always been friendly and helpful, and it's kind of like part of the community.
It makes me really sad. I was born here and it's been a part of my life for all my life. So yeah, we knew Ted Moffat. My husband went to school with him, and Harold, and we know the whole family, and yeah, it's really sad.
It was the go-to store for me. I was born here in 1961, and it's just a store you go to when you need something that nobody else has. Too bad. It's really sad.
Won't be different without it around it.
It will be.
Even the younger generation getting one last look at Champ before he heads off to pastures new.
I wanted to stay.
Want the store to stay?
Yeah.
So what do you like about the store the best?
Champion.
Champion? Okay. You can ask her that.
How was your last ride on Champ?
Awesome.
Still 100 years, an incredible accomplishment and one the family-run business took great pride in.
I'm proud of everything that Northern's accomplished, and I appreciate the community, and I think they appreciated us as well.
As the doors close one last time, locals are asked not to be sad the Northern is gone, but to be happy it gave so many memories over the years, and to be excited for what's next.
Everything runs its time. It's here and now.
Yeah.
Can't change where it's gone, but let's rejoice in the experiences and the relationships we've fostered with this community. Thank you to Prince George, because Northern would not have been here without Prince George.
The other big piece of news before the world changed in mid-March was a terrifying morning near Giscombe Elementary. March 5th saw 27 CN Rail train cars come off the tracks. What was a frightening morning for staff and students at the elementary school right next to the railway crossing could have been a lot worse, as the Transportation Safety Board confirmed after that 7 of the cars were loaded with liquefied petroleum gas, an extremely flammable material. And just a few days later, everything changed. A respiratory virus that had been spreading through China and other parts of the Eastern world had migrated over to North America. On March 11th, the first high-profile case of the novel coronavirus, now known as COVID-19, hit the professional sports world, and it led to a list of cancellations of big events, and that included the World Women's Curling Championship.
Not 1 hour after the World Curling Federation canceled the World Women's Curling Championships, crews were wrapping up the cables, getting ready to go home.
Obviously, it's with great disappointment we make this announcement today, but it's, in our opinion, the right decision, and we want to thank Northern Health, the province, the City of Prince George, Curling Canada, our partners in delivering this event, for their collaboration in putting the event on, first of all, and now in today's decision.
Prince George is about to host the 2020 World Women's Curling Championship.
For Mayor Lynn Hall, who has sought major events since the Canada Winter Games, this is a huge blow.
Since 2015, we talked about being able to host world-class games, and we've had the fortunate opportunity to be able to do that. So it was an exciting time to make the announcement, and today is just the opposite. It's a very, very sad time. But we understand the decision, and as I said, we're certainly supportive of the decision that the World Curling Federation has made.
The decision was made after much consideration with local and provincial health officials, despite the fact there have been no COVID-19 cases in Northern Health to date.
Things are still evolving. We've been aware that the situation has been evolving for a number of weeks and been monitoring that. Some things that have happened around the world, and like the Federation and the Mayor listed, there have been some pretty big decisions and changes in international status around the COVID situation.
The Curling Federation was asked why the decision was made so late, with the first day of events set to kick off tomorrow.
We've been monitoring the situation for a number of weeks now, looking at it, and the advice has always pointed to it's still fine for the competition to go ahead. We've considered all elements and all implications of that, and today, looking overnight, there were some significant competitions across the world cancelled.
And if the global reaction to the coronavirus is any indication, this could be the scene at many World Curling Federation competitions set to take place in locations like Glasgow, Scotland, Kelowna and Slovenia.
Now, the beginning of the pandemic also saw a heightened appreciation for frontline workers as 7 o'clock cheers became commonplace. In Vancouver, residents banged pots and pans every night, while here in Prince George, the hospital parking lot became the place to be as car parades and Indigenous drummers would pass through, thanking our healthcare workers and first responders for their work.
They beeped their car horns, banged on their drums in an effort to get the attention of the frontline health workers inside the hospital. For just over a week, people gathered daily outside the hospital to show their gratitude for those inside.
I'm doing this obviously for number one for the healthcare workers, out of respect for them coming here every day. I hear of stories of 20-hour shifts, just to bring some spirit in a small amount of time.
Enough noise was made Thursday evening as the vehicles looped in the parking lot in front of the hospital entrance, where a group of healthcare workers stood and waved back in appreciation.
We see you, they say. Well, we see them, and they're hearing us too, right? So it's definitely nothing but positive energy. It's community spirit, and for me, it's the heartbeat. The drum is the heartbeat. It's the love for everybody in the world at this time, right? So.
For Wesley Mitchell, he plans to continue the daily evenings of appreciation outside of the hospital at 7.
Yeah, we ain't stopping. I ain't stopping until we get some results from like some vaccines, and you know, I'm not going to stop until I know it's right to stop, and I feel that in my heart.
Next on CKPG News, we continue our look back at the top stories of 2020 as a pair of protests hit our city, from changing the name of a school to changing the direction of society. Locals made sure their voices were heard. Welcome back to CKPG's Year in Review as we move into the spring and summer months of 2020. After School District 57 Board passed a motion in February to change the name of the new Kelly Road Secondary School to Shasti Secondary School, by April, they had settled on a compromise due to hundreds opposing the move of reconciliation.
Kelly Road Secondary / Shasti Secondary. That's the name of the new school building set to open on the Hart in the fall. The decision was made after months of controversy, and it does not look like it's stopped.
They voted on a dual name, and I really don't believe that's going to work. It kind of had to go one way or the other, because when you have a dual name, this just kind of keeps a scar on a school that's going to be there for decades.
You have to make the decision that you believe is best with the information that you have. And I think the fact that we could have a 3-hour debate last night that covered a whole range of topics and gave trustees an opportunity to share their thoughts and to learn from each other is what democracy is all about.
The original decision to change the old KRSS to just Shasti was met with plenty of backlash when it was initially announced, mostly from residents of the Kelly Road and Hart communities. A big reason why was the process of the name change, something Tim Bennett acknowledged.
This process was not perfect. I think, we acknowledged right off the get-go after the motion passed in February that we failed to engage the Kelly Road community in the fact that this motion was coming forward to the board. There were a lot of factors that contributed to this, and I think what we want the public to know is that, we as a board need to learn from, the process this followed.
Students also held acts of protest against the name change, but with just 5% of the student population submitting a formal opinion, the question was raised about how much students, those actually affected by the decision, actually cared. At the end of the day, though, the name change was supposed to be an act of reconciliation. Unfortunately, with how it played out, it may have done more harm than good.
Everyone calls it reconciliation, but it is truth and reconciliation. So there is a truth behind it, and to reconcile the truth, you have to know the truth. So what this is kind of doing is trying to snub out our history, and we don't like that either.
Tim Bennett admits after this process, the school board will have to mend its relationship with both the Lheidli-T'enneh and the Kelly Road communities.
April also saw the tragic death of George Floyd, a black man killed by the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. Protests spread around the world, and by June, the Black Lives Matter movement had gotten here to Prince George.
This was the scene in front of City Hall. Hundreds coming out to show their support for the Black Lives Matter movement against racism and police brutality.
Taking your time and being with us today means you have chosen to stand with us. You have chosen that our pain is your pain. Our suffering is your suffering.
Every day I have to be very conscious of myself and my skin color. I feel like we as the human race, we have outgrown that. I should be recognized as a person, first and foremost.
The crowd was tight-knit and diverse, with people of all ages, genders, and colors standing together.
I think it's important that everybody should stand up for Black Lives Matter.
As Prince George made a stand against racism in the city, the country, and all over the world.
It's very, very sad that because of what's going on in the States, that's the reason why we are talking about racism today. And I feel like people of color should have a voice, and everyone should be treated as one, and everyone should be treated as equal.
A strong First Nations presence also seen throughout the rally, calling out the same issues of prejudice against Indigenous persons that the Black Lives Matter movement stands against.
This is not new to any of us. This has been a long road and an ongoing issue that affects not only the black people in Canada and the United States, but Indigenous people and minorities here in what we call North America.
And of course, a nearly 9-minute moment of silence to honor George Floyd, whose death kick-started global outrage, hoping for a change.
June also saw more bad news in the district of Mackenzie as the forestry sector took another big hit. After reopening its doors 10 years ago, Paper Excellence announced the curtailment on operations at the Mackenzie Mill, effective at the end of June. The decision was based on a couple of factors, the most significant being the lack of fiber, with the majority of sawmills in the region shut down. That was yet another blow to the community of Mackenzie, which was built around forestry.
When you go through the history of what's happened there in the last 10 years, you look at, Conifex buying the sawmills up there and selling off some of their tenure to Canfor. Now they've made a deal with other sawmills as well in the Prince George region. There's a lot of fiber leaving Mackenzie.
Now, by the end of June, the province had slowly reopened after earlier lockdowns brought on by the pandemic. Despite a move back to normal, one of the mere 65 cases of COVID-19 here in Northern Health was showing us all the dangers of the virus. A Prince George woman finally recovered after a whirlwind few months.
People think it's a hoax, and it was just a flu. And I'm sorry, but it was more than a flu. I seriously thought I was gonna die.
The past 3 months have been nothing short of a roller coaster ride for Karen Serwakowicz. Back in March, the 48-year-old began experiencing a fever and a bad cough. Within weeks, she tested positive for COVID-19.
When I was in emergency, the doctor was like, "What do you want to do?" He's asking me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I've been sick since March. I just want to feel better." Like I golf. I want to get on the golf course. He goes, well, we could admit you, but if we admit you, you can risk getting other people sick. You're going to be isolated. You're going to be this. He actually made me feel guilty.
She was put into the hospital still experiencing shortness of breath and placed on prednisone, a drug mostly used to suppress the immune system and decrease inflammation.
And it's like, I'm just sitting here thinking that I wanted this to be better. And it just doesn't seem like I am getting better, and I don't know. Like, they give me these drugs and it's like, do more tests and find out where it's coming from. I just want to get back to my normal living again.
To this day, Karen has no idea where she contracted the virus, admitting that she has an autoimmune disease in her lungs, so she was getting herself prepared before she was even sick.
Well, then the week after, it hit me, and it hit me hard, and it was like, oh, I don't feel good, and then like it was like 4 days or something, and it was just like, it hit me hard.
Meanwhile, her boyfriend Eric had experienced mild symptoms but had recovered relatively quickly. He admits this whole ordeal has been nerve-wracking.
It's a mixture of being terrified that you're going to lose someone you love, and then, you know, feelings of hope, and then being scared again, and it's just, it's up and down.
Fortunately, Karen's past 3 tests have all come back negative and is considered to be in recovery. Both Karen and Eric urged the public to adhere to the provincial health office's mandates so no one has to experience what they've had to go through.
Coming up next on Year in Review, we continue to move through the summer months, which includes disaster both locally and internationally, thrusting first responders into rubble and looking for remains. As we entered into July, former BC Cabinet Minister Ed John pled not guilty to 4 counts of what was referred to as historic sex crimes. John elected trial by BC Supreme Court judge and jury as the charges he received back in November were deemed inindictable offenses. The allegations date back to 1974. John did not appear in court that morning. Instead, his lawyer entered the plea via telephone. The hereditary chief last worked in government as a special advisor for BC's Indigenous child welfare system. A quiet July morning quickly turned to tragic as a fire lit up the Econo Lodge. The blaze, which would later be deemed arson, claimed 3 lives.
As the investigation continues into Wednesday's fatal motel fire, police looking for any sort of evidence the public can provide to help figure out a cause or persons involved. That being dashcam footage, security surveillance, or cell phone images between 7 and 9 the morning of the blaze.
We often knock on doors and go to businesses and such to find that stuff. And in this case, you know, because of the nature of it, you know, we want to see what happened leading up to the fire.
With investigations still in the early goings, police and the BC Coroner's Service are staying mum on any details, including allegations by witnesses that the fire alarms in the building did not go off.
We may gather evidence, you know, in the course of any investigation that leads to helping us understand the cause of death. And if there's somewhere where we can make a recommendation to help prevent death in similar circumstances, we'll do that. You know, I wouldn't want to speculate on any details at this time, especially how early we are in this investigation.
As you can see, we've got both police and fire investigators on scene here. We've got our ident professionals and specialists that specialize in fire investigation here analyzing and going through the scene to determine, again, what happened, whether it's criminal or not, but we want to know what happened.
Now, we did speak with a few businesses near the Econo Lodge today looking for what they heard or saw of the fire. However, none were willing to speak on camera. What they did tell us was that they were cooperative with police, and once they caught wind of the fire, most sent their employees home for the day. Other factors that could come into play include communication with places like WorkSafe BC or other agencies from varying levels relative to an investigation.
It really depends on the nature of each investigation on what different factors can come into play. And certainly we're in the early stages of this investigation, and we also know that police and fire are involved in their own parallel investigative processes.
Identities of the 3 victims will not be released for privacy reasons. However, other details of the investigation may be released at a later date.
While July saw emergency crews in our city busy, as we moved into August, a devastating explosion leveled the port city of Beirut, Lebanon, claiming at least 204 lives and injuring an additional 6,500 people. A local Lebanese family watched in horror as their friends, family, and people of Lebanon tried to pick up the pieces.
I don't remember I felt this sad and this helpless.
The words of Aliyah Hamea, one of just a handful of Lebanese immigrants to Prince George. She and her husband immigrated to Canada in 2007. She's a professor at UNBC and her husband is an engineer, but all their friends and family are back home. They say Beirut is the central meeting place in the country, and so when they first heard about the explosion, they immediately touched base back home to make sure everyone was okay.
Like, I just woke up and I didn't see, I read explosion in the port, and then the first thing that came to my mind is my best friend, my childhood best friend works there. So right away, before I looked at the news or anything, I called her and she said she's okay. She left work at 4 and the explosion happened about 6.
And though they've been in Canada for over 10 years, they go home to visit as often as they can.
We pretty much visit every single year.
That's true.
We go back, and the most of the time that we spend pretty much in Beirut.
Thankfully, no one they knew was injured, though with the economic situation due to COVID-19, the explosion was the last thing Lebanon needed.
Before the explosion, our friends were over and we were talking and we said, oh, this is like the worst. It can't get any worse for people there, because around 50% of people are at the poverty level.
Looking ahead, they say any financial help Canadians can provide, however small it may seem, would help.
Say like to reach out to everybody who can help. I mean, a lot of people think that the price of a cup of coffee does not help, but like if you know what exactly is happening in Lebanon, you'd know that it does actually help. Like, people have lost their life savings just before like COVID, and then COVID came, and now this explosion. Like, people have houses that they can't even fix. So yeah, we'd like to reach out to everybody. You know, just whatever you can, if you can.
If you'd like to give, you can donate online to the Red Cross or to the Humanitarian Coalition.
Coming up next, as the seasons turned and we headed into fall, September saw large-scale crime sweep across the city. We'll have those stories and a big appointment for a local MLA next. Mid-September saw a busy week and a half for Prince George RCMP, but it ended with positive results as police made a significant number of arrests following days of widespread violence in our city.
This is in direct response to the violence that's happened in this community over the last week, and it's likely not the end of it.
Early Wednesday morning, Prince George RCMP executed a search warrant on the 400 block of South Lyon Street, resulting in the arrest of 8 people. 2 men in their 20s were held in custody with court appearances scheduled. Both are known to police and have a history of violence. The other 6 suspects were released pending further investigation and charge assessment from the BC Prosecution Service.
We found 2 loaded firearms as well as ammunition and a what would be described as a stun gun type weapon that were seized as a part of that search. This is in direct response to the violence that's happened in this community over the last week, and it's likely not the end of it.
The response follows a string of violent activity in Prince George over the last week. That includes 7 shootings, 6 of which were connected, as well as a fire. Police say this is a significant arrest.
It is always concerning when violence happens of any kind, but when there's a string of shootings, fortunately, there haven't been innocent bystanders here that have been too affected, aside from maybe hearing the noise. But that, it's unpredictable, and that is concerning for us. This is our priority, and we are putting whatever resources we have towards it to bring it to an end.
RCMP used what's considered special tactics to secure the residents, neighbors saying it sounded like a concussion grenade. Corporal Craig Douglas says that's not unusual in circumstances where suspects may be armed, and that it's to ensure the safety of both police and the people they're attempting to arrest.
A troubling financial report came from the city in April, citing a monthly loss of nearly $1.3 million due to COVID-19. Over the next few months, key players at the city were let go. More layoffs came in early November.
More changes to upper management at City Hall. The Director of Public Works, Gina Late-Liston, is no longer an employee of the city, nor is the Director of Infrastructure Services, Adam Holmes. They are just two of the more recent terminations. Once the pandemic closed a number of civic facilities, the positions held by Glenn Mickelson and Miles Tekolis were eliminated at the end of July. More recently, City Manager Kathleen Soltis was also let go. CKPG News has also learned that 3 positions with CUPE Local 1048 have been eliminated. That is the local that represents inside workers with the city. As yet, there have been no layoffs from Local 399, which represents the city's outside workers.
2020 has been a dark year when we had to close facilities and only be able to reopen some of them. That's gutting to a community, and that's happening all over Canada. It's happening around the world for that matter. So here we are at the point where we're just starting our budgeting for next year. We're gutted from last year, and we're seeing painful cuts that we've had to make throughout the city.
Councillor Garth FRIZZELL lays these recent layoffs and eliminations squarely at the feet of the pandemic as municipalities struggle to meet. In mid-September, the federal government announced $19 billion in funding that would flow to the provinces, which in turn would allocate funds to municipalities.
We're starting to get the sense as of today that the Safe Restart money that the federal government gave to the province is going to flow, and we're hopeful, but we have to take measures because you can't budget on hope.
From the moment a provincial health order came down and the city of Prince George had to close civic facilities, the city has been losing close to $1 million a month. Mayor and council are about to launch into the city's budget cycle, and some municipalities have allocated the promised funding into their budgets.
There are municipalities that have baked into their initial budget projections an assumption that other orders of government are going to be there to help. Because if you don't anticipate additional revenue like Safe Restart, then you have to plan for a reduced budget, or you have to plan for sometimes staggering tax increases. This is not the year to do staggering tax increases.
While the announcements with respect to Late-Liston and Holmes are the most recent, there has been some suggestion there is more to come.
Now, just days after those layoffs to city staff, the city of Prince George announced that they had fallen victim to fraud in September and lost more than $700,000.
We've learned a very valuable lesson, and we don't want other municipalities to be cyber attacked as we were.
Officers worked with international partners to recover just less than half of the amount taken through the sophisticated computer-based fraud. 2 payments to a contractor were fraudulently redirected and never received. Mayor Hall used the event as an opportunity to remind everyone that no one is immune to fraud.
It really transpired by a cyber attack on the city of Prince George, but not just on the city of Prince George, but on vendors that we use to do various projects for us, and that's how it was recognized. And it was through, the cyber attack was through payments that we were making to vendors that we were using on a particular job.
All frauds are typically very complicated, especially those that straddle international borders, and you know, there's so many different ways where things can be accomplished, and these people are very good at what they do.
Now, this fall also saw a provincial election being called as Premier Horgan looked to consolidate the power of his NDP government in the legislature. After an extremely successful campaign that saw the NDP win a majority government, Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson announced he was stepping down. In November, the position was filled in an interim basis by a familiar face. Shirley Bond has been a BC MLA since 2001, serving in the cabinet of both Gordon Campbell and Christy Clark. And after winning her riding again this election, the Prince George Valemount MLA was elected interim leader of her party by the 28 members of Liberal caucus. Bond is just the second woman to be the party's leader and entered the role knowing she had a lot of work to do.
Well, it's my intention to talk to all of our caucus colleagues this week and we'll wait and see what the specific portfolios are. I mean, we have a general sense when a government announces a cabinet, but obviously sometimes there are some variations. So what I want to do is make sure we're matching up the skill set of the people in our caucus with the portfolios and the members of the government that Premier Horgan will announce on Thursday. So it's my hope that hopefully by early to mid next week, I will have the critic portfolios in place. Our primary job will be to hold the government to account. That's what the job of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition is. And so I am very excited about the team of people that I am a part of. So lots of work to do. It's time to roll up our sleeves and make sure that British Columbians' voices are heard in Victoria.
We have one final break to get to. You're watching CKPG's 2020 Year in Review. And when we come back, we take a look at the sports scene over the last year and get to some of the community's high points during the pandemic. We'll switch over now to the local sporting scene, which was also plagued by a wave of cancellations due to the COVID-19 pandemic, starting with the World Women's Curling Championships. Now, the cancellation of 2020's marquee event in Prince George was just the beginning, though. Over the next few days, more local teams would reach the unexpected end of their season. Just a week after the curling championship was canceled, the Prince George Cougars had their campaign come to an end right in the middle of a playoff race. The entire league was disappointed, but knew the cancellation of the season was the right thing to do.
It was very somber, but also very matter of fact, and I think what everybody's interested in doing is taking a look at the future, planning for the future already, facing the reality of today, but also being optimistic and as encouraging to each other as possible, that saying, we'll get through this together. It's not a good situation. This is terrible for teams.
And look to the future is exactly what the Western Hockey League did, as they are planning to start their new season in early 2021 after hitting some roadblocks at the end of 2020 when it came to a definitive restart plan. Now, across the city, the Spruce Kings had been eliminated from the playoffs just ahead of the BCHL officially shutting down their season due to COVID-19. And since then, the league has been working hard to try and get up and running. The league got to a point where they were able to play exhibition games in an extended training camp in both October and November. But due to the second wave of COVID-19, the league's start date was pushed back into 2021.
January 15th is our new target date at this point, but obviously depending on what the PHO says on January 8th. So again, that could change, and if the 8th, if the restrictions stay in place and the 15th isn't going to work, January 15th, the league will continue to meet and come up with a new date. And I mean, there's certainly, with the work that's been put in, we're not going to give up now. And I think that, with the vaccine coming in next week and the start of that whole process, I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel. I think we're going to have the season. When it starts is yet to be determined, but there's been enough hard work put in by everybody that we're going to keep striving to have one.
The unfortunate news of canceled seasons continued up the hill at UNBC as both the Timberwolves soccer seasons and basketball seasons were called off by U Sports. For the Timberwolves soccer teams, the season was officially shut down on June 8th, and for the basketball teams, it was October 15th. The decision, not an easy one, but well thought out by U Sports.
So basically there was a COVID task force that they formed a committee. That committee had the big impact with the soccer decision back in June. And then they continued their work right up until last week or early this week to determine whether or not we could have our winter sports. Unfortunately, they determined that the risks were too high, and hence all winter championships and the competitive league were canceled today.
It wasn't all bad news for Timberwolves athletes this year, as 28 T-Wolves were named Academic All-Canadians, which is a record for the school. Meanwhile, at the pro ranks, former Prince George Cougar defenseman and current co-owner of the club, Dan Hamhuis, officially retired from the NHL at the end of August. He wrapped up a 16-year career in the National Hockey League, filled with a number of milestones and memories.
Still remember my first shift quite clearly in 2003 against Anaheim. It was kind of surreal, jumping over the boards. Couldn't believe I was actually playing in the NHL, and so that was pretty special. And then that run to the Stanley Cup Finals with the Canucks would certainly be up there, and the 2014 Olympics probably the highlight, and the 2015 was a pretty special year too. So those are probably some of the highlights. But man, I could there's a million things that over 18 years of pro hockey that come along.
Hamhuis finished his NHL career in an extremely unique way, taking part in the NHL bubble. The Stanley Cup playoffs featured 24 teams competing for the cup in both Toronto and Edmonton, and in the end, it was a Prince George boy leading his team to Lord Stanley. John Cooper of Prince George guided the Tampa Bay Lightning to their second Stanley Cup in franchise history after they dispatched the Dallas Stars in 6 games in the Stanley Cup final. After years of heartbreak, the Lightning pulled through, and after 2.5 months in the bubble, the Prince George boy had some final words before heading back to Tampa.
Hey, we're going home.
Misfits.
Going home.
We finally get to leave. Oh
Misfits. Hey, you know what though?
Hey, Misfits.
We're going home 35 pounds heavier.
We'll finish our time together with a look back at a few local leaders who strive to bring the community together during this strange year. In November, the YMCA hosted their annual Peace Week and distributed 3 peace medals to locals who work to bring people together in safe ways throughout the year.
Back in the spring, COVID-19 struck, closing a wealth of businesses and canceling big events. Stuck inside and feeling worried about unprecedented times, 3 individuals stepped up in efforts to bring some hope back to the community: Bailey Gross, Dave Horton, and Melanie Hanson. Bailey Gross first started the Hearts of PG movement in March, shortly after news started reporting of rising case counts and closing businesses.
I have 2 kids. I knew that we were going to be stuck in the home. It was all new, and Hearts just seemed like such a simple idea to be able to bring the community together, something to do.
I have the 1968 Trivial Pursuit.
In April, Dave Horton found himself hosting parking lot trivia nights, a simple gesture that then took off and found him further hosting drive-in movie nights and the wildly successful Candy Cruise.
For me, I had to just sit and go, well, what is the right thing to do? I used to know what that was when I was running camp and when I had those opportunities right in front of me and when we could do all those things. But when that shifted with lockdown, I was just forced to ask the question, what is the good that I can do, and how can I start doing it?
Melanie Hanson had also seen the same sense of community engagement when she took to doing car parades back in the late spring. What started off as a small parade of cars for her daughter's birthday later grew into weekly parades reaching into the hundreds.
For me personally, it comes down to we were a parade and that took a community of people to make that happen, so it's our award and it belongs to the volunteers that came every day and showed up and participated to make it happen.
Gross, Horton, and Hanson all received the Peace Medal from the YMCA of Northern BC last week for their efforts in bringing some hope and meaning back to the community. The ongoing message, echoed by all 3 of them, is humbly, none of this would be possible without the community of Prince George.
It really speaks to the people that live in our city. Like, Prince George is great for coming out and supporting each other, and instead of being stuck, in that fear mode, we've seen so many people come out and be helpful instead, and that was just wonderful to see.
This town is dry tinder for the fire of good ideas. And what I mean is, like, this town is ready for someone to light the match on good ideas. And you can see that with the COVID birthday parades, you can see that with the Hearts of PG, and with Candy Cruise and drive-in movies and trivia and everything else.
Now that ends our time together today. Thank you so much for joining in and helping us bid farewell the year that was unexpected, unprecedented in 2020, and welcome in a new year of possibilities. So from us, from CKPG, be safe and enjoy the rest of your holidays.